Hello, how are you guys? This is Sunko, and today is September 4th. No, November 4th. Because next month is December 4th of November. And tonight, I'm going to talk about not specific thing, but I brought something new. I'm going to eat gompang today. Uh, this is like snack that you can find in the old days. Um, uh, from what I know, people in the back, people in the old days, they had this as their like daily eatery. Hmm. Because it was so cheap and it was so uh, approachable that people had it like whenever they were hungry or they were starving. And from what I know, it was easy to make. And when the Korean War broke out in 1956, or uh is the year correct? Uh, anyway, when the war occurred, hmm, many Americans came to Korea and they had a lot of snacks with them. And wherever they went, like Korean people followed them to get some snack. And this is like what American toast around and Korean people ate. That's the memory that I have. Not like the memory that I have when I was in the old days, because I was not born at that time. It's the story that I heard from like elderlies or like people around. Uh, that that story um can cannot be correct, because if I'm wrong, tell me that I'm wrong, because it could possibly be incorrect too. Anyway, mm, not so delicious, not so bad. Mm. Its taste is fairly good because mm, there's not much sugar in it, and I like the food that has less sugar, because as I'm getting old, mm, I don't like the food that's seasoned too much or that has like too much salt or too much sugar. Just plain taste. Mm. You know what I mean? It's like the food that you can have when you are hungry, but then like you wanna be like full, then and you got no time, then you've got to have this. You have like no time and you wanna be full, and instantly it will make you full. Hmm. For that purpose, this is going to work well. Hmm. Old Korean snack time. Hmm. I'm going to have a little bit more, and then I'm going to go over and keep reading the book. Mm. Mm. That's okay. Mm. Not so bad. Okay, I'll be reading the book. And this limestone forms enormous submarine erections of which the hardness and solidity equal granite. Formerly, at the first periods of creation, nature employing fire heaved up the land, but now she enthrust to these microscopic creatures the task of replacing this agent, of which the dynamic power in the interior of the globe has abnormally diminished, which is proved by the number of volcanoes on the surface of the earth, now actually extinct. And I believe that centuries succeeding to centuries and insects to insects, this Pacific may one day be changed into a vast continent, which new generations will inhabit and civilize in their turn. That will take a long time, mm, said Pencroft. Nature has time for it, replied the engineer. But what will be the use of new continents? Asked Herbert. It appears to me that the present extent of habitable countries is sufficient for humanity. Yet nature does nothing uselessly. Nothing uselessly, certainly, replied the engineer. But this is how the necessity of new continents for the future, and exactly on the tropical zone occupied by the coral islands, may be explained. At least to me, this explanation appears plausible. We're listening, Captain, said Herbert. This is my idea. Philosophers generally admit that someday our globe will end, or rather that animal and vegetable life will no longer be possible because of intense, the intense cold to which it will be subjected. What they are not agreed upon is the cause of this cold. Some think that it will arise from the falling of the temperature, which the sun will experience ultra millions of years. Others from the gradual extinction of the fires in the interior of our globe, which have a greater influence on it than is generally supposed. I hold to this last hypothesis, grounding it on the fact that the moon is really a cold star, which is no longer habitable, although the sun continues to throw on the surface the same amount of heat. If then the moon has become cold, it is because the internal fires, to which, as do all the stars of the stellar world, it owes its origin, are completely extinct. Lastly, whatever may be the cause, our globe will become cold someday. But this cold will only operate gradually. What will happen then? The temperate zones, at a more or less distant period, will not be more habitable than the polar regions now are. Then the population of man as well as the animals will flow towards the latitudes which are more directly under the solar influence. An immense emigration will take place. Europe, Central Asia, North America will gradually be abandoned, as well as Australasia and the lower parts of South America. The vegetation will follow the human emigration. The flora will retreat towards the equator at the same time as the fauna. The central parts of South America and Africa will be the continents chiefly inhabited. The Laplanders and the Samoyeds will find the climate of the polar regions on the shores of the Mediterranean. Who can say that at this period the equatorial regions will not be too small to contain and nourish terrestrial humanity? Now, may not provident nature, so as to give refuge to all the vegetable and animal emigration, be at present laying the foundation of a new continent under the equator? And may she not have entrusted these insects with the construction of it? I have often thought of all these things, my friends, and I seriously believe that the aspect of our globe will someday be completely changed, that by the raising of new continents, the sea will cover the old, and that in future ages a Columbus will go to discover the islands of Chimborazo, of the Himalayas, or of Mont Blanc, remains of a submerged America, Asia, and Europe, then these new continents will become, in their turn, uninhabitable. Heat will die away, as does the heat from a body when the soul has left it, and life will disappear from the globe. If not forever, at least for a period. Perhaps then our sphere will rest, will be left to death, to revive some day under spur conditions. But all that, my friends, is the secret of the author of all things, and beginning by the work of the insects. And I have perhaps let myself be carried too far in investigating the secrets of the future. My dear Cyrus, replied Spiller, these theories are prophecies to me, and they will be accomplished some day. That is the secret of God, said the engineer. All that is well and good. Then said Pencroft, who had listened with all his might, but will you tell me, Captain, if Lincoln Island has been made by your insects? No, replied Harding, it is of a purely volcanic origin. Then it will disappear some day? That is probable. I hope we won't be here then. No, don't be uneasy, Pencroft. We shall not be here then, as we have no wish to die here, and hope to get away some time. In the meantime, replied Gideon Spilett, let us establish ourselves here, as if forever. There's no use in doing the things by halves. This ended the conversation. Breakfast was finished, the exploration was continued, and the settlers arrived at the border of the marsh region. It was a marsh of which the extent to the rounded coast which terminated the island at the southeast was about 20 square miles. The soil was formed of clay flint earth mingled with vegetable matter, such as the remains of rushes, reeds, grass, etc. Here and there beds of grass, thick as a carpet, covered it. In many places, icy pools sparkled in the sun. Neither rain nor any river, increased by sudden swelling, could supply these ponds. They therefore naturally concluded that the marsh was fed by the infiltrations of the soil, and it was really so. It was also to be feared that during the heat, miasmas would arise, which might produce fevers. Above the aquatic plants on the surface of the stagnant water fluttered numbers of birds, while duck-tails should not leave their influx, and those fearless birds allowed themselves to be easily approached. One shot from a gun would certainly have brought down some dozen of the birds. They were so close together. The explorers were, however, obliged to content themselves with bows and arrows. The result was less, but the silent arrow had the advantage of not frightening the birds, while the noise of firearms would have dispersed them to all parts of the marsh. The hunters were satisfied, for this time, with a dozen ducks, which had white bodies, with a bane of cinnamon, a green head, wings black, white, and red, and flattened beak Herbert called them Tadorns. Top helped in the capture of these birds, whose name was given to this marshy part of the island. The settlers had here an abundant reserve of aquatic game. At some future time, they meant to explore it more carefully, and it was probable that some of the birds there might be domesticated, or at least brought to the shore of the lake, so that they would be more within their reach. About 5 o'clock in the evening, Cyrus Harding and his companions retraced their steps to their dwelling by traversing Tadorn's fence and crossed the Mersey on the ice bridge. At 8 in the evening, they all entered Granite House. This intense cold lasted till the 15th of August, without, however, passing the degree of Fahrenheit already mentioned. When the atmosphere was calm, the low temperature was easily borne, but when the wind blew, the poor sailors, insufficiently clothed, felt severely. Pencroft regretted that Lincoln Island was not the home of a few families of bears, rather than of so many foxes and seals. Bears, said he, are generally very well dressed, and I ask no more than to borrow for the winter the warm cloaks which they have been on their backs. But, replied Nab, laughing, perhaps the bears would not consent to give you their cloaks, Pencroft. These beasts are not St. Martins. We would make them do it, Nab. We would make them, replied Pencroft, in quite an authoritative tone. But these formidable carnivora did not exist in the island, or at any rate they had not yet shown themselves. In the meanwhile, Herbert, Pencroft, and the reporter occupied themselves with making traps on Prospect Heights and at the border of the forest. According to the sailor, any animal, whatever it was, would be a lawful prize, and the rodents or carnivora which might get into the new snares would be well received at Granite House. The traps were besides extremely simple, being pits dug in the ground, a platform of branches and grass above, which concealed the opening, and at the bottom some bait, the scent of which would attract animals. It must be mentioned also that they had not been dug at random, but at certain places where numerous footprints showed that quadrupeds frequented the ground. They were visited every day, and at 3 different times during the first days, specimens of those Antarctic foxes which they had already seen on the right bank of the Mersey were found in them. Why there are nothing but foxes in this country? Cried Pencroft, when for the third time he drew one of the animals out of the peats. Looking at it in great disgust, he added, beasts which are good for nothing. Yes, said Ginsburg, they are good for something. And what is that? To make baits to attract other creatures. The reporter was right, and the traps were henceforth baited with the foxes' carcasses. The sailor had also made snares from the long, tough fibers of a certain plant, and they were even more successful than the traps. Rarely a day passed without some rabbits from the warren being caught. It was also always rabbit, but Nab knew how to vary his doses, and the settlers did not think of complaining. However, once or twice in the second week of August, the traps supplied the hunters with other animals more useful than foxes, namely several of those small wild boars which had already been seen to the north of the lake. Pencroft had no need to ask if these beasts were eatable. He could see that by their resemblance to the pig of American Europe. But these are not pigs, said Herbert to him. I warn you of that, Pencroft. My boy, replied the sailor, bending over the trap and drawing out one of these representatives of the family of sus by the little appendage which served it as a tail. Let me believe that these are pigs. Why? Because that pleases me. Are you very fond of pig then, Pencroft? I am very fond of pig, replied the sailor. particularly of its feet. And if it had 8 instead of 4, I should like it twice as much. As to the animals in question, they were peccaries belonging to one of the 4 species which are included in the family. And they were also of the species of Tajaku, recognizable by their deep color and the absence of those long teeth with which the mouths of their congeners are armed. These peccaries generally live in hordes, and it was probable that they abounded in the woody parts of the island. At any rate, they were eatable from head to foot, and Pencroft did not ask more from them. Hmm. Towards the 15th of August, the state of the atmosphere was suddenly moderated by the wind shifting to the northwest. The temperature rose some degrees, and the accumulated vapor in the air was not long in resolving into snow. All the island was covered with a sheet of white, and showed itself to its inhabitants under a new aspect. The snow fell abundantly for several days, and it soon reached a thickness of 2 feet. The wind also blew with great violence, and at the height of Granite House the sea could be heard thundering against the roof. In some places the wind adding round the corners formed the snow into tall rolling columns, resembling those water sprouts which turn round on their base, and which vessels attack with a shot from a gun. However, the storm, coming from the northwest, blew across the island, and the position of Granite House preserved it from a direct attack. But in the midst of this snowstorm, as terrible as if it had been produced in some polar country, neither Cyrus Harding nor his companions could, notwithstanding their wish for it, venture forth, and they remained shut up for 5 days. From the 20th to the 25th of August, they could hear the tempest raging in Jacamata Wood, which would surely suffer from it. Many of the trees would no doubt be torn up by the roots, but Pencroft consoled himself by thinking that he would not have the trouble of cutting them down. The wind is turning, woodman, let it alone, he repeated. Besides, there was no way of stopping it, if they had wished to do so. How grateful the inhabitants of Granite House then were to Heaven for having prepared for them this solid and immovable retreat. Cyrus Harding had also his legitimate share of things. But after all, it was nature who had hollowed out this vast cavern, and he had only discovered it. They were all they all there were all there were there all were in safety, and the tempest could not reach them. If they had constructed a house of bricks and wood on Prospect Heights, it certainly would not have resisted the fury of the storm. As to the chimneys, it must have been absolutely uninhabitable, for sea passing over the islet would be furiously against it. But here in Granite House, in the middle of a solid mass, over which neither the sea nor air had any influence, there was nothing to fear. During these days of seclusion, the sailors did not remain inactive. There was no want of food, cut up into planks in the storeroom, and little by little they completed their furnishing, constructing the most solid of tables and chairs, for material was not spared. Nab and Pencroft were very proud of this rather heavy furniture, which they would not have changed on any account. Then the carpenters became basket makers, and they did not succeed badly in this new manufacture. At the point of the lake which projected to the north, they had discovered an osier bed in which grew a large number of purple osiers. Before the rainy season, Pencroft and Herbert had cut down these useful shrubs, and their branches, well prepared, could now be effectively employed. The first attempts were somewhat crude, but in the consequence of the cleverness and intelligence of the workmen, by consulting and recalling the models which they had seen, and by emulating each other, the possessions of the colony were soon increased by several baskets of different sizes. The storeroom was provided with them, and in special baskets Ned placed his collection of rhizomes, stone, pine, almonds, etc. During the last week of the month of August, the weather moderated again. The temperature fell a little, and the tempest abated. The colonists sallied out directly. There was certainly 2 feet of snow on the shore, but they were able to walk without much difficulty on the hardened surface. Cyrus Harding and his companions climbed the Prospect Heights. What a change! The woods, which they had left green, especially in the parts at which the firs predominated, had disappeared under uniform color. All was white, from the summit of Mount Franklin to the shore, the forest, the plains, the lake, the river. The waters of the Mersey flowed under a roof of ice, which, at each rising and ebbing of the tide, broke up with a loud crashes. Numerous birds fluttered over the frozen surface of the lake. Ducks and snipe, teal and guillemots were assembled in thousands. The rocks among which the cascade flowed were bristling with icicles. One might have said that the water escaped by a monstrous gargoyle, shaped with all the imagination of an artist of the Renaissance. As to the damage caused by the storm in the forest, that could not as yet be ascertained. They would have to wait till the snowy covering was dissipated. Gideon Spilett, Pencroft, and Herbert did not miss this opportunity of going to visit their traps. They did not find them easily under the snow with which they were covered. They had also to be careful not to fall into one or other of them, which would have been both dangerous and humiliating. To be taken in their own snares, but happily they avoided this unpleasantness and found their traps perfectly intact. No animal had fallen into them, and yet the footprints in the neighborhood were very numerous. Among others, certain very clear marks of claws. Herbert did not hesitate to affirm that some animal of the feline species had passed there, which justified the engineer's opinion that dangerous beasts existed on Lincoln Island. These animals doubtless generally lived in the forests of the far west, but pressed by the hunger, they had ventured as far as Prospect Heights. Perhaps they had smelled out the inhabitants of Granite House. Now, what are these feline creatures? Asked Pencroft. They are tigers, replied Herbert. I thought those beasts were only found in hot countries on the new continent, replied the lad. They are found from Mexico to the pampas of Buenos Aires. Now, as Lincoln Island is nearly under the same latitude as the provinces of La Plata, it is not surprising that tigers are to be met with in it. Well, we must look out for him. replied Pencroft. However, the snow soon disappeared, quickly dissolving under the influence of the rising temperature. Rain fell, and the sheet of white soon vanished. Notwithstanding the bad weather, the sailors renewed their stores of different things: stone pie almonds, rhizomes, syrup from the maple tree, for the vegetable pots, rabbits from the warren, agoutis and kangaroos for the animal pots. This necessitated several excursions into the forest, and they found that a great number of trees had been blown down by the last hurricane. Pencroft and Neb also pushed with the carts as far as the vein of coal and brought back several tons of fuel. They saw in passing that the pottery kiln had been severely damaged by the wind, at least 6 feet of it having been blown off. At the same time as the coal, so the store of wood was renewed at Granite House, and they profited by the currents of the Mersey having again become free, to float down several rafts. They could see that the coal period was not ended. A visit was also paid to the Chimneys, and the sailors could not but congratulate themselves on not having been living there during the hurricane. The sea had left unquestionable traces of its ravages. Sweeping over the islet, it had furiously assailed the passages, half filling them with sand, while thick bags of seaweed covered the rocks. Okay, I've read. Oh, I spent 30 minutes, about 32 minutes reading. I spent more minutes than I supposed to read. So I'm going to finish and I'll see you tomorrow, okay? Bye bye.